You're not afraid of being alone, you're afraid of yourself. Most people who say they're afraid of being alone don't truly fear solitude. They fear what solitude exposes. They fear the unfiltered, unedited, unmasked version of themselves that appears when no one else is around to distract them from it. Being alone is not the enemy, silence is. Stillness is. The absence of noise is. Because the moment the world quiets down, your inner world becomes deafening, and the parts of yourself you've avoided for years step forward and ask to be acknowledged. And that is what terrifies us, not isolation, but introspection. Think about how we live. Almost every waking moment is filled with stimulation. The constant buzzing of our phones, the endless scrolling, the noise of entertainment, the chatter of expectations. We surround ourselves with noise because noise keeps us from hearing the truth. The moment you sit alone in a room without distractions, something inside you stirs. You start to feel the quiet discomfort of your thoughts. Old memories rise. Unanswered questions surface. The emotions you never resolve knock on the door, and your mind whispers a truth you've been running from. This is who you really are when no one is watching.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
So, let me ask you a question that might sting a bit. When was the last time you were alone without reaching for something to fill the silence? No music, no scrolling, no calling someone, no distractions, just you, with yourself. Because if the idea of that makes your chest tighten even a little, it's not loneliness you're afraid of. It's the confrontation with your own inner landscape. We say we fear being alone because it sounds socially acceptable. But underneath that lie deeper fears. Fear of our unhealed wounds, fear of our suppressed desires, fear of the emptiness we've been avoiding, fear of the truths we haven't dared to face. Solitude removes the barrier between you and your subconscious, and suddenly you meet the parts of yourself you've tried to outrun, the sadness you buried, the insecurities you disguised, the dreams you abandoned, the anger you swallowed, the versions of yourself you became to please others. Solitude brings all of it to the surface. And here's the philosophical dilemma at the core of this. If you fear meeting yourself, how can you ever truly know yourself? How can you build a life that actually fits you? The fear of being alone is really the fear of self-awareness. When we're surrounded by people, we can blend into the external world, taking on their rhythms, their expectations, their ideas of who we should be. When we're alone, we have to face the question of who we actually are. And many of us don't know the answer, because we've spent years, sometimes decades, building identities that were shaped more by survival than authenticity. From childhood, we learn to adapt. We learn to behave in ways that earned approval, love, safety, or attention. We shaped ourselves around others' expectations without even noticing it. And by the time we reached adulthood, we were carrying versions of ourselves that weren't born from truth, they were born from adaptation. Solitude threatens those identities. It strips away the roles we play, the masks we wear, the performances we've perfected. Alone, there is no audience. Alone, the persona dissolves. Alone, the real self emerges. And that real self may not match the identity we've spent years presenting to the world. Let this question sink in slowly. Do you fear being alone, or do you fear realizing how far you've drifted from your true self? There's another layer to this. When we're alone, we face the emptiness inside us, the spaces life hasn't filled yet. And emptiness is uncomfortable because it demands honesty. You start asking questions like, what do I truly want? Why am I unhappy? Why do I repeat the same patterns? Why am I drawn to certain people? Why do I avoid certain truths? What am I afraid to admit? What am I avoiding feeling? These questions are the kind that reshape a person from the inside out, but they are also the questions most people spend their lives running away from. Alan Watts once said that we fear ourselves because we misunderstand ourselves. We believe our darker thoughts define us, our insecurities diminish us, our doubts expose us. But these things simply reveal the parts of our psyche that haven't yet been brought into the light. Solitude can feel like a confrontation, but it's also an invitation to understand the architecture of your own mind. Yet instead of accepting that invitation, many people try to fill the emptiness with noise, relationships, entertainment, chaos, or constant movement. Because movement feels productive, noise feels comforting, chaos feels distracting. But what if the thing we call loneliness is actually a signal? A signal telling us that there is something inside us we need to understand. something asking to be healed, something asking to be heard. Here's a thought-provoking question to end this part. If you never give yourself the chance to meet who you are in silence, how will you ever know if the life you're living belongs to you or the version of you shaped by fear? Why we use other people to avoid ourselves. If we look honestly at our lives, we'll notice something most of us would never admit out loud. We don't always seek connection because we love people. We often seek connection because we need protection from ourselves. People become our escape routes. They become buffers between us and our inner world. We lean on their energy so we don't have to feel our own. We immerse ourselves in their stories so we don't have to examine ours. We drown in their presence so we don't have to sit with the discomfort of our solitude. And it's not because we're weak, it's because facing ourselves requires a level of honesty most humans aren't trained for. Think about how quickly we run to others at the slightest discomfort. The moment boredom appears, we call someone. The moment sadness appears, we distract ourselves with company. The moment anxiety surfaces, we seek validation or reassurance. We use people as shields from the truth that the most difficult emotions we experience are not coming from the outside world, they're rising from within us. And the more we rely on others to suppress what we feel, the more terrified we become of facing those emotions alone. We create dependency not out of love, but out of avoidance. Let me ask you a piercing question. How many of your relationships are built on genuine connection? And how many are built on your fear of silence? People become our mirrors. When you're alone, the only reflection you see is your own. But when you're with others, you get to borrow their sense of identity. You adopt their energy, absorb their beliefs, and settle into the version of yourself they expect. That's why certain people make you feel confident and others make you feel small. It's not because you are changing, it's because your identity becomes fluid in their presence. And as long as your self-image is tied to external interactions, being alone becomes terrifying. Because being alone means the mirror disappears and you are forced to see who you are without influence. There's also this: when we're alone, we cannot hide from our patterns. If you keep choosing emotionally unavailable partners, solitude will show you why. If you keep attracting chaos, solitude will reveal the internal chaos that matches it. If you keep settling, solitude will illuminate the wounds that taught you to accept less. But as long as you surround yourself with people, you can convince yourself the problem is always out there. People become convenient distractions from the uncomfortable truth that the patterns in your life are shaped by the parts of you you haven't healed. This is why some people bounce from relationship to relationship, friend to friend, distraction to distraction. They're not afraid of being alone, they're afraid of meeting the version of themselves that emerges when no one else is around to mute their inner world. They fear the childhood wounds that surface in silence. They fear the insecurities that appear without distraction. They fear the identity crisis that comes from realizing they don't know who they are without others. But there's a deeper layer, one most of us never confront. Many people use others as emotional noise-canceling devices. If you're constantly surrounded by voices, opinions, and energies, you never have to question your own. You don't have to ask yourself whether you are actually happy, whether your goals belong to you or to others, whether your relationships reflect your truth or your fears. Noise can create the illusion of wholeness. Presence can mask emptiness. And attention can feel like affection, even when it isn't. But here is the uncomfortable paradox. The more you rely on others to avoid yourself, the more alone you feel internally. You can be surrounded by people and still be emotionally isolated. You can have a full social life and still feel hollow. You can be loved by many and still be estranged from yourself. That's because no amount of external connection can compensate for the disconnection happening inside you. So let me ask you something that will challenge everything you believe about relationships. Do you want people, or do you want the feeling of not having to sit with yourself? This is why solitude is such a spiritual teacher. It forces us to confront the truth of how much of our social life is built on love, and how much of it is built on avoidance. Solitude reveals which relationships nourish us and which relationships numb us. Solitude shows us what we feel, what we believe, and what we fear without the influence of others. Solitude uncovers the self beneath the performance. But most importantly, solitude reveals this profound truth. Until you can sit with yourself without fear, you will never truly choose people, you will cling to them. And clinging is not love, it's escape. In the next part, we will explore something much deeper, something that sits at the core of all loneliness, the shadow self you've spent your whole life avoiding. The shadow self, the you that you've been running from. If you trace every fear of being alone back to its source, you will eventually discover something most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid: the shadow self. It's the collection of every emotion you suppressed, every truth you denied, every desire you buried, every might you never forgave, and every part of your identity you hid because you feared it would cost you love. The shadow is not evil, it is simply unacknowledged. It grows powerful in the dark. And when you're alone, it becomes impossible to ignore. This is why solitude feels threatening. It's not the emptiness around you, it's the fullness within you that you've never dared to meet. Most people think they are running from loneliness, but they're actually running from the parts of themselves they labeled unacceptable. The anger they swallowed, the sadness they minimized, the insecurities they laughed off, the guilt they never admitted, the dreams they told themselves they were too unrealistic to pursue. These pieces don't disappear, they sit in the background, shaping your choices, your relationships, your behaviors, your patterns. And the moment the world gets quiet, these pieces rise to the surface and whisper, "Remember me?" That whisper is what most people call loneliness. But it is in truth a call for integration. Let me ask you something that requires courage to answer. When you say you don't like being alone, which part of you are you actually trying not to face? The shadow reveals itself most intensely when you're sitting in silence, because silence removes all distractions. You start hearing the voice you ignored during the day, the one that questions your choices, challenges your habits, exposes your self-deceptions, and reminds you of unmet desires. You start feeling emotions you buried because they were too heavy to carry at the time. You notice the ways you've betrayed yourself. You see the relationships you stayed in out of fear. You recognize the dreams you abandoned for safety. You feel the truth of who you are underneath the expectations of who you should be. This confrontation is uncomfortable, but it is also the beginning of real freedom. Because the moment you face your shadow, it loses power. Shadows only haunt when they are unseen. But many people run from this inner confrontation by filling their lives with noise work, relationships, entertainment, drama, constant motion. They don't realize that avoiding their shadow also means avoiding their potential. The shadow contains not only pain, but also power. Every part of you that you've suppressed in fear is also a part capable of expanding your life in ways you can't imagine. The anger you avoid could teach you boundaries. The sadness you suppress could deepen your capacity for connection. The insecurity you hide could guide you toward truth. The dream you abandoned could lead you toward purpose. Yet meeting the shadow requires a level of self-honesty that most people fear. Because self-honesty means acknowledging the gap between the life you are living and the life you actually want. It means admitting that some of your relationships are built on fear, not love. It means recognizing that some of your achievements were motivated by insecurity, not passion. It means seeing how much of your life is shaped by wounds, not choices. This level of truth is terrifying. But ask yourself this: what is more frightening, facing who you are or spending your entire life as a stranger to yourself? The shadow doesn't punish. It informs. It reveals what you truly desire, what you truly need, and what you've been pretending not to feel. It shows you the parts of yourself you abandoned because you thought they made you unlovable. But here's the twist. The more you reject those parts, the more disconnected you become. And disconnection from yourself is the true root of loneliness, not the absence of people. This is why some people feel lonely even in a crowded room. Their loneliness is not social, it's spiritual. It's the loneliness of not being at home within themselves. So the question becomes, how do you make peace with your shadow? How do you sit with yourself without fear? It begins with curiosity instead of judgment. When a difficult emotion appears, instead of rejecting it, you ask, why are you here? What are you trying to show me? When an old memory surfaces, you ask, what did I need back then that I never received? When a painful truth arises, you ask, what would my life look like if I finally accepted this? Curiosity transforms darkness into insight. And once you begin exploring the shadow, something extraordinary happens. Solitude becomes less like a threat and more like a sanctuary. You begin to realize that the person you feared meeting is the very person you've been longing to understand. And the more comfortable you become with your inner world, the less dependent you become on external noise. In the final part, we will explore the transformation, the moment when fear dissolves and being alone becomes not avoidance but power. The liberation that comes when you finally become someone you're not afraid to be alone with. There is a moment, subtle yet life-changing, when the fear of being alone begins to dissolve, not because you forced yourself to be stronger, not because you distracted yourself enough times to numb the discomfort, but because you finally realized the truth. The person you were afraid to be alone with was never your enemy. It was simply the version of you that had been waiting to be acknowledged. And once you stop running from yourself, solitude becomes something radically different. It becomes a mirror of clarity, a place of power, a space where your thoughts are no longer threats but guides, where your emotions are no longer burdens but messages, where your shadow is no longer a monster but a teacher. Most people believe the transformation begins with confidence or discipline or healing, but it begins much earlier with honesty. The kind of honesty that dismantles every lie you told yourself to survive. The honesty that forces you to admit when you've outgrown people, environments, beliefs, and versions of yourself you once clung to. The honesty that pulls you out of roles that never fit you and dreams that were never yours. This is the honesty that solitude demands. And it's exactly why so many avoid solitude, because honesty is uncomfortable. But discomfort is the price of freedom. The person who avoids discomfort avoids growth. And the person who avoids growth eventually becomes trapped inside a life that feels too small for who they really are. Let me ask you a question that cuts through everything. If you strip away every role you play, friend, partner, professional, sibling, achiever, who is left? Who are you without performance, without expectation, without the identity shaped by other people's needs? If that question terrifies you, that's your starting point. That's the doorway to the transformation that changes everything. Because once you begin discovering who you are beneath the layers you've accumulated, you start to experience something most people never reach: internal safety. It's the feeling of coming home to yourself. With internal safety, you don't chase people, you choose them. You don't tolerate chaos, you recognize it as a reflection of someone else's inner world, not yours. You don't cling to relationships out of fear, you connect out of truth. You stop performing for acceptance because you no longer need acceptance to feel real. You stop filling silence with noise because silence no longer exposes you, it supports you. This is the power that solitude unlocks when you stop fearing yourself. You begin to realize that every emotion you once tried to suppress, loneliness, fear, confusion, sadness, disappointment, wasn't a threat. It was a message. Loneliness was the part of you that longed for connection with yourself. Fear was the part of you that wanted protection. Confusion was the part that wanted clarity. Sadness was the part that wanted release. Disappointment was the part that wanted alignment. Everything you feared facing becomes the guide that leads you toward the life you are meant to live. And here's the paradox that only becomes clear once you've embraced solitude. The stronger your connection to yourself becomes, the more beautifully you connect with others. You stop choosing relationships from emptiness and start choosing them from wholeness. You stop seeking validation and start seeking resonance. You stop attaching out of fear and start relating from truth. Solitude, once mastered, doesn't make you detached, it makes you capable of deeper love because you are no longer loving from a place of hunger. But the greatest transformation is this: once you become someone you're not afraid to be alone with, you stop settling. You stop settling for friendships that drain you, for relationships that diminish you, for environments that suffocate you, for dreams that limit you. You stop living a life shaped by fear and begin living one shaped by intention. Solitude becomes the place where you recalibrate your soul, where you listen to your intuition, where you reconnect with your purpose, where you rebuild your identity from truth rather than survival. Being alone becomes the space where you grow into yourself fully, unapologetically, powerfully. So here is the final question, the one that holds the key to everything this journey has revealed. What would your life look like if you no longer feared being alone because you finally became someone you trust, someone you understand, and someone you genuinely enjoy being with? Because when that moment arrives, and it will if you allow it, your fear dissolves, your patterns change, your relationships transform, and your entire life begins to shift around a new center. The unshakable, grounded, peaceful connection you've built with yourself.